Well, good morning and many thanks for allowing me to be part of your Sunday morning this morning. I'm going to turn just for a few minutes to the life of Jacob this morning, one of the great Old Testament characters. We thought a little bit about him last week, and we're going towards the kind of middle of his life in Genesis chapter 32. Reading a couple of verses, it's a great experience that he had that profoundly changed the way that Jacob would live thereafter. And in Genesis 32:22 it says, "And he arose that night and took his 2 wives, his 2 female servants, his 11 sons, and he crossed over the ford of Jabbok. And he took them and sent them over the brook and sent over what he had. And Jacob was left alone, and the man wrestled with him until the breaking of day. And now when he saw that he did not prevail against him, he touched the socket of his hip, and the socket of Jacob's hip was out of joint as he wrestled with him. And he said, 'Let me go, for the day breaks.' But he said, 'I will not let you go unless you bless me.' And he said to him, 'What is your name?' And he said, 'Jacob.' And he said, 'Your name shall no longer be called Jacob, but Israel, for you have struggled with God and with men, and have prevailed.' Then Jacob asked, saying, 'Tell me your name, I pray.' And he said, 'Why is it that you ask about my name?' And he blessed him there. So Jacob called the name of the place Peniel, for I have seen God face to face, and my life is preserved. Just as he crossed over Peniel, the sun rose on him, and he limped on his hip. And we look to God to bless his word this morning. So Genesis chapter 32, tremendous experience in the life of Jacob. And in this experience, we see that Jacob's life is profoundly changed. It's one of the great struggles of Jacob's life. In fact, it's really what we might refer to as a conversion experience. His life has changed, his name has changed, and the way that he lives changes, because in this struggle, he never walks the same way again. It's a complete change in Jacob's life. Now, what is happening, of course, in this little section is that Jacob is encountering God. He encounters this great struggle with God, and Jacob holds on to God, and it is one of these great experiences of his life. Now, Jacob, of course, up until this point, is a man who has lived by his wit and by his will. He's lived by ingenuity. He has stolen a blessing and stolen a place and position from his brother, and has even outwitted his uncle. But in Genesis chapter 32, he arrives at this place where he will meet God, and he comes to this place with all of his problems. He has a great entourage with him. He has his 2 wives and another 2 female servants and 11 sons, and all of them have their problems. It's really quite a household. Amongst those 11 sons, there are 2 murderers, there's an adulterer, there is 2 individuals that have been involved with incestuous relationships. So he comes to God, in a sense, in Genesis 32 with all of his problems and all of his baggage. And he comes there with all of his history, a man that has diddled and swindled. In fact, his name, literally, Jacob, means cheat. And he wrestles with God in this place in Genesis chapter 32. And one of the great cries that comes out of this section, as God lays hands upon him, in verse 26 it says, "Let me go, for the day breaks." But God says to Jacob, just quit, just finish off here. It's obvious that you've had enough, and just let go. But Jacob holds on to God. He doesn't let him go, irrespective of the problems and the trials and the difficulties that he's come through, and all of the baggage that he carries. There is something there that holds on to God and refuses to let go of God. It's fascinating as you read about the experiences of people in the extremity of circumstances, that you find this time and time again, that oftentimes in the extremity of circumstances, when everybody would say, forget God, if there's a God in heaven, why did this happen? And as I read some of the testimonies and the stories from, for example, from the Holocaust, you'll find that many do indeed, in the extremes of suffering and problems, they do abandon God. But there is this nucleus of individuals that hold on tenaciously despite the struggle and the problems and the difficulties, because they know that only in God is there any hope. In fact, there's a lovely little book that was written by a Jewish psychologist from Auschwitz about his experience in it. It's called Man's Search for Meaning, Viktor Frankl. And in it, he says that within that Auschwitz camp, there was a small group of individuals, and they seemed to be able to survive with hope better than anybody else. And those were that little group of Christians, that little group of believers who had faith in the God of heaven, because they knew that even although this world was such a terrible and a tragic place, and even although there was this struggle of human life, there was only hope in God. Because if there was no God, then this is all there is, this suffering, this tragedy, this trial, this turmoil. And here in Genesis chapter 32, Jacob, in his struggle, he holds on to God. And as he holds on, God is going to do a work. He doesn't abandon God. God isn't abandoning him. And God touches the thigh of Jacob. And from that moment on, Jacob is profoundly different. He never walks the same way again. It has been a challenge to me as I look back over the last year of the COVID, and the way that my life has changed, the way that our church life, for example, too, has changed. And as we understand that God is in absolute control, irrespective of decisions that might be made by politicians or disease and pandemics that may well be out with human control, God is in control. It would be a great tragedy for you and I to look back over that year and to learn nothing. To go forward with having taken no lessons from it. And sometimes we see that, don't we, in the lives of people, that when they have their problems and their trials and their baggage, a bit like Jacob does here at the beginning of this chapter, with all of those problems in his family, a couple of murderers, a couple of adulterers, and a couple of incestuous relationships, and a mixed bag of polygamous marriage, and all of the problems that he comes with. It would be so easy, to be a bit like those 10 lepers who get cured by the Lord Jesus, and only one of them returns. When we have our problems and our trials and our difficulties, maybe then we're a little interested in the God of heaven, but then as everything settles down, we forget him. And it would be such a tragedy in our lives if God speaks when he speaks, in the trials, in the fears, in the difficult situations. And the setting of Genesis 32 is a very difficult situation, because Jacob is going back to face the music of meeting his brother Esau, whom he stole from many years before. It would be very easy in the trials and difficulties of life as we pass through to look for the help of God, and then once we maybe get through those difficulties and trials, then just to forget him. A bit like the 10 lepers, only one of them came back to thank the Lord Jesus. Their problem was solved, they don't need him anymore. It is such a waste of our life and a waste of our experience of God if we don't learn anything. And with Jacob here in Genesis 32, as he struggles with God, he learns, he's changed. He never walks the same way again. And he leaves the failings and the faults and the sin of his life, in a sense, behind him, as God touches him, as he holds on tenaciously in faith to God, and God literally changes his name. You're not going to be called Jacob anymore, cheat. You're going to be called Israel, prince with God. What a tremendous change in his life as he holds on despite the difficulties and the trials, and he holds on and he learns from those trials and difficulties. I'm looking back over a year that has been completely crazy in so many ways. We need to learn from it, don't we? Those experiences that we've had, perhaps, that have cut us off from maybe areas of our lives that we used to find fruitful, maybe we used to get encouragement from, and we've been cut off from them, and we've been faced with the realities of life, of death, of the eternal, of the spiritual. We've been given opportunity to reflect, to pause, to think about what is really important. Jacob was given that, and he holds on to God. God blesses him, and God changes his life, and he's never the same man again. May God richly bless you you in the week that's ahead. Many thanks for being with me this morning. Thank you.